born and raised in Lahore, and that's how I know Meher.
Oh, wow, it's quite far from us right now.
We're just going to, Mehreen, Rabia was with me in Shoifat, and same group of friends, same crowd, same Sara Kuch. I'm certain we all have mutual friends. Okay, we're live. So Rabia, Mehreen, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to Kaarvan Crafts Foundation. Thank you for being here with me tonight. It's much appreciated. I'm just going to introduce both of you. So Mehreen, we'll start with you. Mehreen Shahid is the founder of the Safe Delivery, Safe Mother initiative, which aims to reduce maternal mortality in Pakistan. She also advises the public sector, health sector, on poverty alleviation, health, housing, and education. She has a Master of Public Policy from the University of Oxford. Rabia Khan is the managing director was the managing director at Sensign. As MD, she has provided scientific leadership in the use of real-world evidence and accelerated the drug discovery and development pathway. Her international experience has encompassed senior roles at Benevolent AI and Meta. Her broad strategic focus includes medicine, healthcare, network biology, genomic medicine, complementing her strong academic background. She has a PhD in human genetics from McGill, a MBA from Concordia, and has worked at the Crick Institute. She has been an advocate of women in STEM and has been recognized as 50 movers and shakers in biobusiness in the UK. Ladies, welcome.
Thank you so much for the introduction.
Thanks, Meher.
Not at all. As we've seen in Pakistan, whether we live in Pakistan or we're connected to Pakistan from abroad, it's clear that the Pakistani healthcare system is not up to par. That's always been obvious. But with COVID, the gaps, the issues related to healthcare have become even more and more painstakingly obvious, painfully obvious. And I'd love to talk to you in particular about it, your thoughts on Pakistani healthcare, and especially when it comes to females, because as is often the case, females are the ones who bear the brunt of everything. So Mehreen, let's start with you, and then Rabia, I'd like to turn to you. Mehreen, you look at a very specific area of Pakistani healthcare, which is maternal health. Could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
So basically what I do with Safe Delivery, Safe Mother is we work to train frontline health workers on addressing the leading causes of maternal mortality in Pakistan. So a lot of the focus that we do is in rural areas. So we're based, we do focus urban areas, but हमारा rural and semi-urban areas में ज़्यादा interest है, या मेरा personal interest ज़्यादा है. So we train frontline health workers, and then they are the ones who are your skilled birth attendants, your health workers, who are then responsible for deliveries across their district. And in Pakistan, if people are not aware, or I'm sure they probably are, there's a major population problem. So we have like about 5 million annual pregnancies, which is a huge number. So it's a pretty daunting figure, and there's a lot that's going on around that. And that's exactly where we're working, because there are the leading causes of maternal mortality are highly preventable. And that is the main area where we focus.
Okay. Now, when it comes to healthcare in particular, Rabia, you've been a strong advocate of looking at mental health in Pakistan. What has your research shown you so far? What is the status of it so far? Since it's still very much an area that's not really explored.
Yeah, so I think, Meher, thinking about this panel and spending some time looking at the research area, the first thing that struck me was there's not a lot of data available in Pakistan, and it's not surprising at all, but we don't really consider mental health to be a disease in Pakistan. I think that's quite unfortunate, because there's no difference between, let's say, diabetes and schizophrenia. They're both genetically predisposed with an environmental component. In Pakistan, unfortunately, women, as you know, end up bearing the brunt of a lot of the social inequalities that we have. And so we have a higher rate of suicide and so on in women, according to some publications, and not according to others, because there's no data. And so I think personally, there is a need to really change the way we think about mental health. And I think COVID is bringing that to light. and change the stigma around it. I think we have pagal khanas, right? And if you're suffering from depression, you're called pagal, and it has this ridiculous connotation, which makes no sense. And we do need to change that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're
Maybe
disadvantaging
you
an
go
entire
out and you work
population.
in rural areas. I mean, what have been the obstacles for you when it comes to healthcare in you know, villages? What's the biggest issue that you face?
So I think when we look into specifically a lot of these issues, socioeconomic constraints become some of the primary deterrents for receiving quality and skilled maternal health care access. Or uske piche there are factors around, religious beliefs, not being allowed to leave the house, women's health is not a priority, or they deliver with untraditional birth attendants called dais. And then there's so these elements, men making decisions for women, but interestingly in rural areas it's the mother-in-law making decisions against the benefit of the woman. So these factors play a key role in preventing women from seeking access. But uske saath saath, the other problem is it also prevents these women from realizing that they don't have like any agency or control over their body. So those are also some elements that come out of this, which are deeply problematic. And I think when we look at COVID specifically right now, a lot of these problems have even become worse. Women then being stuck at home, domestic violence के issues हो जाते हैं, and then उसके अलावा भी they're not able to get to the facilities, and the host of issues that have been highlighted through COVID have also been very, very scary, witnessing those.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Rabia, have you ever found a correlation? For example, after giving birth, women face a lot of, mental, emotional issues. Have you come across in your research any correlation between maternal trauma and mental health within Pakistan? And do you feel that that's an area that has not been explored at all?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, Meher. I think postpartum depression is not something we acknowledge in Pakistan, period. And it's really unfortunate. I think globally there is a taboo around women. If you've given birth and all of a sudden you feel like you can't talk about depression because you're a bad mother. And specifically in Pakistani society, I think we've just ignored it. I think it's not even recognized as something that happens. There's no data.
Yeah.
There's no publications. It's hard to understand. But I think the social stigma around these things has to change. And I think Maheen can probably comment on that because it's exacerbated, I imagine, in the rural areas.
I think if we look into specifically not only rural areas, what's been very, fascinating for me is women don't know or can't express that they're suffering from postpartum depression. Yeah. And when you ask them or you talk to them, so they'll explain, we were very low, or we were, it was really difficult, or I went through a phase. And then when you go into the detail of that, they don't, specifically know that this is depression or that their household is going to recognize it. It's just something that they have to move on in life. So they don't even get that opportunity, which is why when I look at the rural demographic, I find that they're so far behind that it's sometimes becomes even like a conversation. Like it sometimes even becomes difficult to start that conversation. Do you know where is the starting point and how do you tell them and enlighten them?
Yeah. But then, Rabia, what would you recommend that how do we start a conversation around mental health in Pakistan? Because even though there are organizations that have actively tried to help people with mental related illnesses, there's still this stigma. How would you recommend, having lived in the West and seen how mental health is treated there, how would you tackle it in Pakistan?
So I'm a big believer, Meher, in not taking what's worked in the West and trying to stick it on top of Pakistan and say, well, of course this must work, right? Because we have our own issues, religious, social, cultural. But I think fundamentally there's an educational piece and a data generation piece. So we don't have any data. So we as scientists can't make informed decisions. So understanding the prevalence of schizophrenia in Pakistan, understanding the prevalence of bipolar. But then the other thing is educating the public. So I always like to draw in a parallel to diabetes, right? So if you are obese and you have diabetes in Pakistan, no one criticizes you. No one is saying you're obese, you're not taking care of your health, and you have diabetes. It is not a good thing to be doing. It's not a stigma to be obese in Pakistan, whereas you are voluntarily impacting your health. And I think that's not a good thing.
No.
Depression is no different, actually. You have a genetic predisposition and an environmental factor. And in fact, you don't choose either of those things in Pakistan. And so treating depression, schizophrenia, bipolar as diseases that are driven through your genetics, through the way you're born with it, and through the environment, the social culture that we impose upon you because of the way we've structured Pakistani culture, and acknowledging that people don't choose depression, people don't choose schizophrenia, they don't go pagal, bhoot nahi chad gaya. Educating around that, providing treatment, and then providing psychiatric care. I mean, I was just doing some reading. There was an article that said there's one psychiatric doctor for every 10,000 people in Pakistan. That's shocking. How do we change that?
That's awful. Marine, do you find that this situation is as bad in maternal health, given that you've gone out and you've worked with these rural midwives? And वहाँ पे भी अक्सर ये होता है कि लोग बातें करते हैं कि वहम बहुत करते हैं कि अगर एक औरत को बच्चा होने वाला है तो चांद ग्रहण, सूरज ग्रहण अगर है तो वो मत आए क्योंकि वो बच्चे पे होएगा. तो आप इन चीज़ों के साथ क्या करती हैं जब आपको ये लोग वहम बताते हैं?
So इसमें ये है कि what we do is कि because we work very closely in the field with these women, with the skilled birth attendants who are going to be talking to these women, the best approach is that the way that we've done it is we've designed curriculums that cater to low literacy rates at that level. So usme what we do is we give them specific examples of what are the issues in these areas and how you can raise awareness, how you can counsel these women and their families, or ab kya aapki approach kya honi chahiye. So that has worked really well. And what we've even designed is pictorial pamphlets. So bilkul jo low level of literacy hota hai, they can see the picture and know ki usme ho kya raha hai. So usme ye hai ki what we try to tell them and work with is that you have to take the entire household with you. So if they counsel a pregnant woman and send her home, oftentimes nothing is going to happen. Is not much that she controls in her house. So, we then convince them that the mother-in-law, the husband all comes on board. You give them ownership, make them accountable for a few of those things. So that these approaches do work. And I think what's also very important is to specifically address these topics under the name of these topics. Not just say, for example, as we talk about PPD, right? So it needs to be addressed, ये एक condition है, ये होती है, और ये किस time होती है, कैसे होती है, तो ये अगर आप बताएं, तो then obviously people will listen and they'll know, and eventually, as you talk about data points, then that's the next step once awareness is raised.
Absolutely. Rabia, is that an approach that you feel you would like to take when it comes to mental health in Pakistan in terms of working at the local level?
I think so. I think, you said it so well, because there's a massive education piece that has to happen. People need to understand. I mean, I've witnessed personally schizophrenia. I've watched it through some very close relatives. People hallucinate, right? And then I've seen people locked up in basements and cages as the way to manage schizophrenic patients. Because if you put them in so if you put a woman in a pagal khana, she's probably going to get raped. And so if you try and find the statistics on how many men or women get raped in pagal khanas, it doesn't exist. The fact that it's called a pagal khana needs to stop. And so I think educating the public in that if you've got this type of person in your family, there's a very high probability that there are other people in your family that are going to suffer from this. There's a high probability your children will suffer from this. If you marry within the family, there's a high probability that you will increase the rate of schizophrenia or bipolar in your family. And pictorial education at a really basic level, and getting people to change the way they think. This is probably a 10-year journey. This is not a 1-2 year journey.
No. Marine, I remember you mentioning that, when you go out and you train the midwives and you speak to these ladies and you tell them कि भाई एक बच्चा हो गया है, अब जरा 2-3 साल आप आराम से रहें. Do you explore the genetic side as well? Because अक्सर होता है ना कि अब जो आम तौर पे पढ़े लिखे हो, जाहिल हो, शहर के हो, गांव के हो, they all have the same mentality कि बच्चे अल्लाह की देन है. They're a blessing from God. And therefore, if you're pregnant, you're blessed with the very best in this universe. But have you ever explored genetics in your field of work as well as part of maternal health care?
So genetics per se has been a bit hard to talk about, and
Ah,
the implications of that, because वो मतलब I don't know how to put it except for just saying that rural areas और उधर इतने ज़्यादा grave problems हैं जो, so I'm not saying that mental health rates lower. I'm saying that the problems that come above it are life and death. So we talk about postpartum
yeah,
hemorrhage where women bleed to death in 10 minutes and die. So जब हम उसकी बात करते हैं, फिर हम उसकी, there's so many things that we talk about. So this is a very important issue that's definitely on our list that we want to talk about. It's just one of
yeah.
those things that you have to kind of factor into when and how you do it, considering that a lot of those things that we're doing are literally getting a woman to a healthcare facility in time so she doesn't die, or getting like a woman delivered by a skilled birth attendant so she doesn't die, which
Huh.
seemingly sound very basic things, but they are urgent and much needed
No, but
and
I'm
are
so
life
glad you
threatening
brought
at
that
that
up
level.
because Rabia, it's absolutely Rabia. This is what I wanted to ask you was that healthcare in Pakistan is at such a poor state that I mean we're barely covering the basic minimum here, as Marine just mentioned. That at literally they just want to get the woman to a hospital so she can deliver a baby. So when it comes to mental health, do you feel that the state should have a stronger role to play in it? Or does the
I do.
responsibility lie more with civil society to be more open to conversing about mental health?
I think the state, because healthcare is a problem, right? So why would I worry about
Yeah.
schizophrenia if I'm going to get tuberculosis and die of TB, right? Or I can't get
Yeah.
a normal, I'm delivering with dyes, I'm going to end up in septic shock and die. So who cares about schizophrenia? And therefore, there needs to be a top-down effort, which is, look, this is something that we struggle with as a society. I mean, mental health is one of the leading issues globally. And it affects your
Yes.
working population, 18 to 25-year-olds, right? Every time I've picked this topic with someone I know who's Pakistani, the initial reaction is they don't want to talk about it. And then if you probe a little bit further, they'll be like, yes, in my family, I also have this. And so everywhere you turn, this is something that exists in everyone's family. And so the sooner we deal with it, grapple with it, because what we are doing actually, and I've seen this with my own eyes, we don't talk about it. You have a daughter, she has depression. So the mother gives her her antidepressants. They don't tell the husband, shadi ho jati hai. And then she keeps getting the antidepressants from her mother. And then eventually, when the mom dies, this woman is suffering from depression. She might be suffering from bipolar. It affects the children. It affects the way you raise them. It affects how many children you have.
Yeah.
So if we were to just take a moment and accept it, it has downstream consequences.
Absolutely.
I think to add
Very
to this कि अगर हम government की side से देखें वो क्या involvement कर सकते हैं. So I think for example, like the government has their own maternal health curriculum, and adding a mental health component to that is something that's completely doable. So we also so in Pakistan's context, you have to look at the cost effectiveness of things, the scalability of things, and whether they're applicable. And this is something they can totally do, right? So they have regular refresher trainings. Usme they can add a mental health component, जिसमें then they raise awareness on what is PPD, what are the challenges you can face, वो क्या है, कैसे उसको address करना है. फिर ये how that specifically trickles down is in antenatal checkups, postnatal checkups. उसमें वो अगर डाल दें, so this is something that's doable. These conversations can very much be had, and they're not something that's जिसमें आप you're asking them for millions of dollars and all of that. So I think this is the important link to make in Pakistan's context, right? It's doable.
But if it's doable, what's holding them behind? What's the obstacle?
So I guess it's the priorities, the priority of the, as I mentioned, इतने major issues हैं with what's happening on the ground, why it's happening, what are the causes, referrals, getting ambulances, all of that. So the focus has been primarily on that. And वो जो अब mental health पे जो अब ज़्यादा over the last 5-7 years जो आई है awareness पाकिस्तान में, उसको फिर eventually थोड़ा time लगेगा to incorporate that as well from the government side. Because I see that's how it's going to be. You see, if you go back 20 years, the scenario of maternal health was very different, at least in the Punjab province for sure. And the reality of even being able to get an ambulance from many rural parts of the country is also very different. So it's more about getting the advocacy, the awareness, the buy-in, and then you kind of, move to the implementation phase.
Absolutely. I mean, Rabia, if you were to come to Pakistan and talk about genetics, how open do you think the state would be, right, given the current circumstances?
Genetics in general, or genetics around mental health?
Genetics in general. I mean, a lot of people don't understand. For example, we have a huge Marine, I'm certain you must see this in in the field that you work in, cousin marriages, right? Cousin marriages is a huge thing. And it's done for many reasons. It's done to keep wealth in the family, to keep businesses in the family, to keep land in the family. Of course, there's also the lineage thing. You keep the bloodline pure. For example, I come from a Sayyid background, so in our, it's very difficult to marry out of the Sayyid thing because it's seen as a taboo. Like, ye kya kar diya, khoon kharab kar diya hai. And it doesn't matter what happens to the children. How would you? I mean, would you at some point like to consider tackling that in Pakistan?
I think this is such an interesting topic. As a geneticist, the first thing is, if you marry close to your area, right, that is just bad news by and large for your offspring, right? So if you marry a first cousin, it's terrible. You shouldn't do it. Because let's assume, so most diseases that we know have some genetic component, diabetes, cancer, schizophrenia, bipolar. And so if you marry outside of your family, then you have a higher probability of not getting all of those genes mixed up and having children with those disorders. So I pulled up some numbers, interestingly, Meher. Beta thalassemia, right? Global prevalence, 1%. Punjab prevalence, 6%. Why? Because it's so common to marry your first cousins and your second cousins. And what we're doing is
that's awful.
Basically propagating these things that are preventable. And in addition to that, I think it's really, really bad because there's a lot of things that we don't understand biologically yet. And I think cancer is a big one. If your mom has had breast cancer and you are at a high risk of breast cancer, and then if you marry within the family, the probability that your daughter is going to have breast cancer is now higher.
Of course.
Why would you consciously do that? Right? I think it is something we don't talk about because it's so taboo, yet at the same time it has serious consequences.
Yeah. Marine, how do you deal with that? I mean, aksar hota hai ki villages are such small, tight-knit communities that people, and of course in villages the caste, sort of not even the caste, the ethnicity, कि बलोच जो हैं बलोचों में करेंगे, पंजाब के जो हैं जट हैं वो अपनों में करेंगे. I mean, is that something that you've tried to address as well?
So उसके बारे में अगर conversation होए भी, so it's a bit difficult because in rural areas a lot of the decisions or a lot of the things that have grave implications are then Islamically tied. And Islam is specifically, it's not mentioned anywhere कि cousin marriages या marriage within the family आप नहीं कर सकते. और ये कि क्या है तो उस पे argue करना difficult है. And इतने numbers, मतलब उस तरह का data नहीं है, as you're saying, there is a data problem. So explaining that, talking about that, and explaining why it's actually wrong. So the breast cancer example you've given is a good example, but it also highlights that it's a very specific example that people with a certain amount of IQ and understanding would be able to enforce, right? So you can't expect कि हर बंदा ये link निकाल के, and then they say कि जी इस्लाम में मना नहीं है तो आप हमें who are you and where are you coming from? Are you from the West?
Absolutely.
And I mean, like, I'm not from the West, but then things are hard, right? So I mean, the realities on the ground here are hard, and I think recognition of that is very important. And also, I think tying it all to religious roots and Islam and the role it plays is a very, very important determinant.
Bilkul. Interestingly, there was this webinar that I was part of, and this was somebody this is Abdul Qadir, part of Pure Health in the UAE, where they've set up the largest testing center. They're doing up to 40,000 tests a day. And I asked Qadir, I said, how is it that you've been able to set this up, in the UAE? And he said, well, look, the state was helpful, but the religious clerics also played a very constructive role. So for example, he mentioned this part of the azan that says, when translated, come to prayer. So he goes with the religious cleric. They said, yes, come to prayer, but in your own homes. They added that bit in it. Do you feel Marine, I'm gonna ask you first. Do you feel that that religious cleric on board is an approach you would like to take when it comes to maternal health?
Well, absolutely, it makes all the difference, especially at the village level, because
Yeah.
they're trusted, they're respected, they have a major buy-in. They're called community leaders. They're basically called faith leaders. अगर आप उनके
Huh.
पास जाते हैं and they believe in your cause or they understand, so they'll play a
Yeah.
pivotal role in helping you, helping raise awareness. And plus, the most annoying bit out of that can sometimes be कि वो they're unquestionable, right? So फिर आप मतलब कितना उनके साथ आप करते हैं, वो कितना you know how strong you want that relationship to be, and wo are other questions, but definitely like they can play a key role and they
Absolutely.
do.
Absolutely. Rabia, is that something you'd like to consider when it comes to
Yeah,
GP and mental health? I mean, I know that we all sort of squeam in our chairs and we think, अच्छा मौलाना साहब को समझाना पड़ेगा और साथ रखना पड़ेगा, but it's a way forward. I'm just putting it out there. Is it something you'd like
yeah.
to explore?
I think that's a really interesting point, Meher. I tend to paint with the same brush the entire lens of Molanas, but obviously there's a spectrum, as there always is. And I think there's some
Yeah.
people that are more progressive and will understand the necessity of ensuring that you educate your people on the impact of, let's say, cousin marriages and how that impacts your ability to have children, which in Islam,
Yes.
you know, you're supposed to have children. So if you end up marrying someone and you have multiple genetic mutations, you won't have normal children. And these are
Right.
testable things. We can test for that today. In Saudi Arabia and many places where this is prevalent, actually people test before they allow the marriage to happen. And
Yeah.
so these are things that can be done and that have religious consequences. Around mental health, I think there's definitely an education piece as well. And you can't work in Pakistan without religious support and understanding of how it impacts Islam. But at the
No.
same time, it's important to not to forget that there is other religions in that country, and we must not forget them, and we must not ignore them. And because they are ignored, actually, they suffer more than everyone else. And I would say it's important to engage with all religions, not just Islam.
No, of course. Mary, what role does
But sorry,
technology?
I just would like to I
Go
would
ahead.
like to add something though. I do feel that yes, I mean, you know, if you're taking clerics on board and the problems with that and stuff, but I think this applies a lot to the West as well. Look at modern day US, right? Go into the heart of the US. Like I've lived there, right? I mean, seriously, the kind of stuff and the people you have to get on board is even more ridiculous. So I
I
don't think this is an East
totally
problem. I don't
agree.
think it's a
I
Pakistan
don't think
problem.
so.
This is something I would push back on when people say to me, because I say,
No,
guys, I've lived there, I've seen it. I've seen like such ridiculous comments, and you need to take those people on board. So this is a reality in all parts of the world. What's most
yeah,
important is looking at कि हम with the local realities को आपने कैसे लेके चलना है. And that's
exactly.
what gets you success, right? And that's where the chaos is, and that's where the excitement also lies, right? Yeah, you know, you've gone to a village and you've been able to convince 1,500 people, and you know, and they're on board with whatever you're talking about. I think that's also kind of like a success story of sorts.
I think your point is completely true. I mean, just watching the election right now and everything leading
Yeah,
up to the US election is
Yeah,
case in point of
yeah,
what you just said. So the madness is
yeah,
everywhere. Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. No,
absolutely.
I was in the I was living there in 2016 when the first madness happened, so I witnessed it firsthand.
Oh no, Mary,
Yeah.
you had to face the ugliness of it all.
Yes, I was there. So I was living in New York at the time. So I was like, this is madness. Time to get out. And I did.
Mary, what role does technology play in the Pakistani healthcare system? I mean, with COVID, for example, the government has taken the initiative and they've made this app. You know, that app has its own issues. वो hack भी हो गई है, वो passwords भी पता लग गया है सारों को and everything. But it was an initiative
Mm.
and it must be commended. At Kaarvan, for example, we've tried to economically empower women by giving them digital literacy. शायद वो कायदा ना पढ़ सकें, शायद वो ABC ना पढ़ सकें, लेकिन उनको स्मार्टफोन और अपनी प्रोडक्ट्स की तस्वीरें लेके अपलोड करना on the e-commerce platform that we've given them, they've got the ability to do that. Do you think that technology is the way forward for Pakistani healthcare? Would that help? Or are we too far behind right now, still covering the basics?
No, so I don't think so. I think technology is definitely the way to go ahead, and a few
Yeah,
provinces, specifically Punjab and KPK, has done phenomenal job at that. In fact, Punjab is
yeah,
referred to as e-Punjab now.
yes,
Everything that they do is online. The district data they get online. Everything is mapped out. I've stayed at the department. I've worked there. I've supported them. I've helped them as well. So that's phenomenal.
yeah,
Even the work that we're doing, for example, the monitoring and evaluation we're doing is on the app. Uska bhi credit I would give to the Punjab government. They have given Android phones to the birth attendants. They have
yes.
given them the education. They have brought them to that level कि वो report कर सकती हैं. हम जाके additional training जरूर देते हैं अपनी ऐप पे, but वो सारा कुछ है. तो इसमें स्कोप बहुत ज्यादा है. और जहाँ तक कोविड की बात है, कोविड में ये है कि so as you mentioned about the app, that all is fine. I think the track and trace system जो सारा है वो तो होएगा ही digital. It's very hard to do it on paper. जिसको वो करना चाह रहे हैं, some form of it, right? So I'm not going to get into the details of that and
No,
bore
no, yeah,
people, but उसका scope है काफी. But I'm just saying that the track and trace, some version of the track and trace, it can be done. And I'm just saying that this is, for example, like even like our school in Oxford, the Blavatsky School came up with a response tracker, which the Indian
yeah.
government misused and said we're doing
Oh,
phenomenally well. And then the tracker from Oxford people, they said that this is not accurate reporting, and then they had to kind of take that back. कि अच्छा
yeah.
नहीं हम we are not doing as well as we said we were. So ये challenges तो हर फर्क फर्क तरह से मुल्कों ने फेस किए हैं.
Good,
पाकिस्तान में सिर्फ
good.
प्रॉब्लम ये है कि इसको स्केल के लेवल पे इसको किस तरह फिर करेंगे वो फिर remains to be seen right now.
Of course. Rabia, how would you feel about that? I mean, it's interesting because when it comes to mental health, generally speaking, and this is a broad generalization, a lot of people have found safety by telling their stories of mental health, their issues with mental anxiety, depression. Even myself, as a mom, I've been a vocal advocate of PTSD, yes, and postnatal issues online. I've never really actually gone and addressed someone because I find it easier to tell my story online. It's out there, it's done. I don't have to engage. It's a coping mechanism. Do you feel that technology can certainly help develop the mental health care system in Pakistan?
Absolutely. So I think Pakistan, so the first point on the app being a problem,
Ah,
I think Pakistanis, I do this. We're very good at talking about how it's failing and Pakistan's negative, this and that,
ah,
similar to the
ah,
mullahs, because there's crazy people everywhere. But I will say, the NHS has deployed an app and it has made frontline news everywhere for various, the UK.
yeah,
And it has also had challenges, and I think every country has had challenges, and I think Pakistan and the different provinces are truly they're people. They're trying the best they can with the
yeah,
resources that they have, and the challenges are very unique and very complex. And we really do have to, work with them because you've got a highly uneducated population. And so the other thing I will say around digital in developing countries is that we have an opportunity. I think Rwanda is a very good case study where a company like Babylon has gone and implemented digital technologies. And so we don't have to go through the same evolution that they went through. We don't need to do the NHS the way they did it. We don't need to do public healthcare the way they did it. We can go straight digital. Why would we? Why wouldn't we adapt technology first when it's available to us? And I think Africa is a good case in point for the way they've managed e-payments, for the way they're managing digital health now. And I think mental health will benefit from this because now you can have, there's a great company in Pakistan where she's this founder, she's allowing women who are trained doctors to consult digitally so you can have
yes,
women
yes,
re-entering the workforce, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's a great company, it's a great idea, and it exists in Pakistan because this is a Pakistan unique problem. And so I think mental health it has an opportunity here. I think maternal health has an opportunity here.
yeah.
If we embrace digital and forget about trying to do what the West has done and follow their path and follow a new path that we forge as our own.
Yeah,
You know,
I agree with.
I also think I want to just add. I mean, a lot of the things you say are super relevant and true. And I think one of the things is that if anything that COVID-19 has highlighted is that this was not a West versus East problem. It's brought the most
Oh,
developed countries' healthcare systems to their knees, right?
yes,
Yes.
And udhar to, I mean, for example, like when people say that New Zealand has beaten COVID, it's great, but it also kind of pisses me off because they don't have any challenges. as such.
Well,
They
they're
don't
an
have any
island.
borders. I
Exactly.
mean, they've got like choti si population. It's homogenous. There are no issues. There's no borders. Nobody's going in and out. Okay. I mean, you're not bordering Iran and China at the same time. So when people boast like that, I mean, it's great. I'm not taking away from their success.
No,
I'm just
not at
saying
all.
this is
In
not
con-
oh God यार न्यूजीलैंड ने कर लिया और हम अभी तक यहीं फंसे हैं अभी हम तो यहाँ इसलिए फंसे हैं कि हमारे पास तो 100 और प्रॉब्लम्स हैं that
हाँ,
New
बिल्कुल.
Zealand possibly can't. I mean, they've got like what cows and people. We've got like so many other things going on. So I just feel that this is important to put out there. I also feel that a lot has happened. I also feel, for example, आजकल the smart lockdown has played a good role, and I feel that there are factors that we had to consider as a country, which were very difficult at the time that
Yeah,
they were considered when to open the lockdown and all, are also realities around COVID, which I think are important to be said and be put out there as well.
I think
absolutely.
just adding to that, Meher, when we had spoken about this, one of the things which you had mentioned earlier, Marion, is I was in the UK when they implemented the lockdown, and it was very simple. Everyone stay at home, and then they started doing that in Pakistan, and I remember thinking to myself, you're going to force a lot of women to stay home, and the rate of
Yes.
abuse is going to go up.
Yeah.
And Marion, you said it. You're on the ground. You've seen it, and we don't talk about those things. We just take what's happening in the West and stick it onto Pakistan and assume it's going to work. Well, it's not actually.
Yeah.
And we need to have our own way of figuring it out because we are bordered very differently. We're not New Zealand.
Absolutely. And
We
I'm
have
so
it not
glad
easy.
you brought this up, Rabia, because we had the founder of Mahol Mate, Uruzja, on board. And she and I, we were discussing this. Again, it was a different Kaarvan session about the millions of unwanted pregnancies. And I'm sure, Mehreen, you'll find that in the rural areas as well. And it's about, well, unwanted pregnancies is another issue. That's the physical side of it. But what about the mental side of it? What about what women have had to endure while sitting at home? And this applies, interestingly, to women of all segments. Whether they were rich women, poor women, urban, rural, Sarak, which we're all in the same boat. And I think, personally speaking, for me, I'll be writing a piece on this as well. I find that being digitally connected has been a lifesaver for me, for myself. Mehreen, how have your the women that you deal with, how have they coped with the lockdown?
They've really suffered and they've struggled as well. For example, अगर हम एक abortion की सिर्फ बात कर लें, so it's उसकी इतनी mental problems होती हैं, women छुप के करती हैं, they do it secretly. And some of the trainings we do, the medicine we give, it also causes it can also be used for abortion. And there's such a taboo there, so they just kind of stress out like, are you going to teach us on that? And then you're like, no, I'm not going to do that. So they're hiding from their husbands and all. So considering the COVID situation, they're kind of stuck in that situation. जब कोई outlet नहीं है. A lot of these women, then we connected over WhatsApp groups बनाए होते हैं हमने district के. उसमें तो post करी होती हैं. So then we reach out to them and say, how's everybody doing? सबका morale क्या है? How's everybody feeling? What are the major issues that you felt? And they share on that group, and it's a good avenue for them because they're literally very constrained.
That's very true.
Yeah.
That's very, very true. I remember Rabia Mehreen, when I've interviewed Mehreen before as well, and she mentioned that when they go out in training, they make these books and these handouts and these pamphlets, with pictures and drawings. Do you think that one way of addressing mental health, particularly for women and children, would be going down that route? I mean, the tech side.
I think you have to.
But that's another way of dealing with it, yeah?
I think what Marion said in the beginning, which is engaging at that level with that type of content, engaging with the key opinion leaders in Pakistan, that is your religious segment, right? In different parts of the world, those are different. And bringing the household with you is something that I think is super important, because if you don't have the mother-in-law engaged, it doesn't matter what you do. Right. And so these are the realities of our society. We're not going to be able to succeed without them. So I think working with people that understand those realities, working with people that understand why Pakistan is unique and beautiful as a result of that, and engage with that mentality is the only way we're going to be able to make a difference. I am a firm believer that you can't take what's worked somewhere else and apply it, it won't work.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, as an example, what we do in a lot of our simulation-based trainings is we do role plays. So what we do is we actually set up the entire healthcare facility, जिसमें एक औरत आती है, she's sitting, mother-in-law साथ बैठी है, and then we have those very designated roles. So the mother-in-law is aggressive, telling the birth attendant off non-stop or cutting her off. And the mother-in-law will do that in our sessions, and she'll keep cutting off the birth attendant, and the pregnant woman is submissive, and then the husband is looking to his mother for guidance. So when you do that, the same can happen for mental health, where you say, let's simulate a scenario where you're sitting, a woman comes, she talks about domestic violence, or she talks about anything else even that's linked to her mental health and well-being, चाहे वो बेशक maternal से भी ना link हो, वो आके आपसे बात करे. When she does it, so what is the scenario? What are the problems? How do you? So that has really helped, because during those sessions we talk about real cases, we talk about real challenges, we talk about how you can address them, we talk about them in a very concrete, action-oriented way, and I think that same thing can be definitely applied to mental health as well.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, recently there's been an onslaught of sexual assaults in terms of cases coming out, whether in schools or in universities or in workplaces. And there was this young fellow, and he came out with a little book in Urdu, and it said "Mera Jism, Meri Marzi," and it's written from the perspective of teaching a child about their own bodies. And I genuinely feel that there is definitely a link between how we view our bodies and our mental health as well. So many of us have been, taught कि आप घर की इज्जत हो, आप ने अपना ख्याल करना है, टांगे बंद करके बैठो, दुपट्टा करो, काज अपने आप नू कपड़ियां दे नाल, as they say in Punjabi, काज के रख. And at some point, I remember, Rabia, many years ago, you used to say this, that, you can take a rubber band, you can stretch it, but ultimately it's going to snap. And I feel that many women reach that snapping point once they have their first child. That's when the triggers come out regarding mental health. Would I be incorrect in drawing that, Rabia? And I'm just talking from what I've seen amongst friends and family and cousins and all.
Yeah, I don't know how to comment on that without like appropriate data points. I think because it's multifactorial, right? When you have your child, you've gone through an emotional time in a difficult, it's difficult everywhere. I think it's difficult on a mother, it's difficult on your body. It's very familial, so all the issues of your family come out. Right, we are a tight-knit culture. The mother-in-law is involved, your mother-in-law, and everyone's parents are involved. 15 people you probably don't know get involved, just like they do on your wedding. And so I think psychologically it's a difficult time. And I think, do women snap more after having children? You could make the other argument is because the other argument is that this beautiful thing has come to the world and now you can ignore all the noise. And that's the flip side. I don't know the answer to your question, but I think it's important that we don't ignore the mother once the child is born.
Yes, absolutely. Marine, is that something you address in your trainings as well for the midwives and especially the mother-in-laws? How do you tackle them?
Yeah, so this is something we specifically address and talk about a lot, because what happens is in these parts of the country where women deliver, they're suddenly expected to normalize and get back to work. So when I sit with them or talk to them, they say, I'm feeling down or I'm upset, or even if there's any physical health, it's kind of pretty masked. So then we do counsel them on specifically how to bring it up, how to talk about it, how to tell them कि आपको अपना time चाहिए, you're not physically at par to start, housework at 100%, or whatever that may be specifically for them. So yes, these women talk a lot about these things, and I've told Meher this before as well. It was such a heartbreaking story by a midwife once when I was training her, and she said there's this woman who's miscarried 3-4 times because her husband couldn't bear with her nausea. So he used to beat her and she would miscarry. And she came to her for the 3rd or the 4th time, I think, when she was expecting. And she said that I'm not being able to carry a child. I'm upset that I'm going to be childless. And the reason turned out to be this: the husband used to just beat her. And then this midwife played a significant role after we had trained her to go and counsel the family, get the husband on board. Then she started giving her nausea medication. She started telling her how to manage it. how to like, not always be nauseous in front of him, or how to manage that scenario as well. So there's a host of things we taught her. And after that, she delivered her first baby. So these stories are real, they happen every day, and these women do need to be saved. I mean, I personally feel like if I've done like my job with even one woman, it's a big deal, and we've trained a lot of people by now. We're up to targeting. We positively influence about 300,000 annual pregnancies and deliveries every year, and I think the numbers are huge here, right? So I'm just giving you one story, and this is completely mental. This is completely mental health related. Like, a husband has got some phobia in his mind that he's beating his wife for a physical symptom. It's just, the link is crazy. So uske
वो
andar ghusna,
situation
unko
की वजह
samjhana.
से,
And but the situation was very grave for this woman, right? But she said, I don't want to be childless. And so we have to help her get through that. It's like बहुत stories है उधर भी.
बिल्कुल, absolutely. Absolutely. Ladies, we're coming towards the end of it. So, Rabia, if you'd like to share any last thoughts with us about how...
Oh, Meher, that's been really interesting. What did you say? Sorry?
Sorry, did my voice break out? As in, how would you, in terms of your last thoughts, would you also sort of talk about how you propose that one starts a conversation around mental health in Pakistan from this point onwards?
Yeah, I think, Meher, you know that this is something really close to my heart. And, personally, I think the way forward is exactly like Marine said, which is education. Marketing, I think, is a big piece. I think marketing and media and television can change minds faster than anything else. And content generation. And to me, that is the starting point. Data generation, secondary. And then lastly, better drugs. We don't have good treatments, but I think that's a far, far way off. So
yeah, absolutely. Marine, any last thoughts you'd like to share with us? As always, I'm in awe of your work, and I'd love to get involved in any way possible. But any thoughts you'd like to share here with us?
No, thank you so much, Meher. I think it's for me, it's always more about looking at the positive side of what's been done so far in the journey we're at, right? So even if I look at mental health today, or अगर हमने उन areas में जाकर इसकी awareness करनी है, so we can even do something as effective like a no means no, and what does that actually mean, right? And that's a very powerful campaign that can be done as an example, right? And so I feel that that's around mental health. There's a lot of different programs and different initiatives and silos which can incorporate mental health and make it a part of what we do right now on the ground. From a maternal health perspective, I mean, I just feel, in terms of last words and thoughts, is that I feel that anybody who's watching, or people specifically even in Pakistan and abroad, can play a key role in improving and enhancing maternal health in Pakistan. There's so many ways to do it. Raising awareness, facilitating in terms of your time, in terms of supporting initiatives on the ground, in terms of fostering partnerships. So I just feel that I always urge people not to think that this is a medical field, and not to think that this is only for public health or maternal health experts. This is for so many people can come forth with a lot of what they offer. And that's something that I would like people to take away. That, think about what you can do, what's that one small thing that you can do. And I promise the impact of that is going to be huge, because I've seen that happen in my own case as well.
Absolutely. I think what's remarkable is that with you, Rabia, as well as you, Marine, both of you, what you've done is you've initiated something in some form. And these are areas that are they seem so basic, but it's shockingly unexplored. But I really commend both of you for taking the stand, pushing it forward, starting a conversation. And I agree I work in the media, and I also run a social enterprise, but definitely the media has to play a role. Since we all lived in Lahore during the 90s, I'm sure you will remember there used to be these ads that used to come on TV, PTV and STN, about birth control, ke bache do hi achhe, if you remember. And for a while,
that was a fantastic campaign.
It was indeed. And I still remember, I have a rural background. So when we would go back to the villages, we would see those green chabi ke nishan, Behbood, Flahi, Sehat, Wazir Sehat or something. I've forgotten what it was. But it has happened. And the reason why both of you are so dear to me in terms of what you do is because I want to see your work carrying on in our children's futures as well and not see it happen. And I wish you guys all the very best of luck. As always, you have all my support. Thank you so much for joining in today.
Thank you so much.
Platform.
Thank you so much for the
Thanks,
opportunity.
Meher.
Thank you so much.
Not at all. Thank you, ladies. Take care and stay safe.
Thanks both.
Bye.
Hafiz.
That was Rabia Khan and Marine Shahid. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found the conversation interesting. As you can see, there's a lot that has to be done for mental health. It's not all lost. There are good people out there, such as Rabia and Marine, who are doing their bit. Join them, help them, support them. Take care. Good night. Khuda Hafiz.